The moonlight shimmered over the sprawling Neverland Ranch, a place that looked like a fairy tale but hid shadows darker than any child's nightmare. Michael Jackson, the king of pop, was at the peak of his fame. Glittering gloves, sequined jackets, and a smile that could melt millions of hearts masked the reality of a man whose life was being consumed by obsession, secrecy, and controversy. By the early 1990s, whispers began to circle quietly at first, then with growing intensity. Parents, fans, and journalists had begun to notice peculiarities in Michael's interactions with children. The mansion was a playground of wonder, amusement rides spinning in the night, a private zoo, and rooms that seemed to exist only to entertain. Yet behind the colorful facade lurked unanswered questions. One evening, a mother named Karen Fay, a longtime makeup artist in Michael's inner circle, would later recount a night that would become emblematic of the mystery surrounding him. He was a child in spirit, she said, but there were boundaries no adult should cross, and sometimes I felt unsure. Karen's eyes would glisten with unease. Even decades later, it started subtly. Invitations to the ranch for sleepovers, private visits, gifts that were extravagant and unusual for a child. Letters exchanged between Michael and his young friends carried a warmth, a care, and sometimes a bewildering intimacy. Those within the circle defended him, describing him as a misunderstood artist, clinging to the innocence of youth in a world he could no longer trust. But the darker side was creeping in. By 1993, allegations emerged that shook the world. The first lawsuit, filed by a young boy and his family, ignited a firestorm of media attention. The headlines screamed of impropriety. Yet the pop icon's reputation and legion of fans shielded him from the worst of the fallout, at least publicly. Internally, the chaos was suffocating. Lawyers, managers, and publicists scrambled to control narratives, orchestrating appearances and carefully curated interviews to maintain Michael's image. In the shadows of Neverland, the life of Michael Jackson was a dual reality. The public adored him, sold out arenas, and celebrated the music that transcended generations, while behind closed doors, fear, secrecy, and anxiety gnawed at him. Friends noticed mood swings, sleepless nights, and moments where his own identity seemed fragile. Part of the controversy centered around the very nature of his obsession with children. Michael claimed his home was a sanctuary, a place where he could be surrounded by innocence in a world that had corrupted him. Psychologists and investigators debated whether this was a genuine desire to nurture, or something more sinister. Then came the fateful day that would mark the scandal forever. The family of a young boy accused Jackson of abuse, and the world could no longer ignore the storm. As cameras flashed and reporters circled, Michael appeared calm, even jovial. The gloved hand waved to fans, the smile unbroken. Yet behind those eyes, the weight of scrutiny pressed heavily. It was the beginning of a case that would change the trajectory of his life, dividing fans, families, and the global public. The first part of the scandal revealed the duality of fame, how immense adoration could coexist with doubt and suspicion. And it was only the beginning. Michael Jackson's world of glitter and music, of magic and wonder, was about to collide violently with accusations that would haunt him forever. The headlines were relentless. Each morning, the world awoke to a new accusation, a new theory, a new rumor. Tabloids flourished on innuendo. News anchors debated morality and celebrity, dissecting every move Michael Jackson made. Neverland, once a sanctuary of joy and fantasy, had transformed into a fortress under siege. Gates were locked, security tightened, and the laughter of children that had once echoed through the grounds grew quieter, measured, cautious. Inside the mansion, the atmosphere was tense, a delicate balance between defense and despair. Michael, who had always been a man of whimsy and generosity, now felt cornered. Friends noted a change in him, nervous glances, a trembling hand when talking on the phone, and nights spent pacing the hallways with the hum of his music echoing faintly behind closed doors. Lawyers advised silence. Yet Michael struggled with isolation. He wanted to speak, to explain himself, to be understood, but every word risked further scrutiny. The settlement discussions began quietly, behind closed doors, away from the public gaze. A civil settlement was reached, reportedly in the tens of millions, allowing the case to end without admission of guilt. The money was not the point, it was the appearance, the need to silence the storm without revealing the deeper truth that gnawed at him. Meanwhile, the media frenzy intensified. Every move, every smile, every hand gesture was analyzed, critiqued, and twisted. The public, divided, either worshipped him as the innocent king of pop persecuted by adults or condemned him as a predator hiding behind fame. Friends of Michael tried to shield him, but even loyalty had its limits. Staff whispered about the weight on his shoulders, the strange routines, the insomnia, the reliance on medication to calm his anxieties. Then came the intrusion of the press into his personal life. Helicopters hovered above Neverland, cameras peered into the grounds, and journalists crafted narratives that blurred reality and speculation. Michael's trust in people eroded. He stopped leaving the ranch, except for the most controlled appearances, Children who once ran freely across the lawns now visited only under supervision, and even then, boundaries became strict. The settlement brought temporary reprieve but left a residue of tension that would never fully vanish. In private, Michael expressed frustration and fear. "They'll never let me live," he told a confidant late one night. "No matter what I do, they'll always see me as guilty until proven innocent in their minds." The confessional tone revealed vulnerability, a man trapped between public perception and private truth. Haunted by allegations he vehemently denied. During this period, Michael's health began to show strain. Sleepless nights, heavy reliance on prescription medication, and the constant psychological pressure created a perfect storm for physical decline. Yet his performances had to continue. The world expected perfection. The king of pop's iconic dance moves, his angelic voice, and his ability to evoke wonder remained intact. Behind the scenes, he was unraveling, quietly, in ways the public would never witness. The first settlement also fueled conspiracy theories. Was Michael truly innocent, or was he buying silence? Did fame protect him, or did it amplify suspicion? The narrative became a labyrinth of rumor, speculation, and selective truth. Fans protested, demonstrating outside courts and media offices, defending the man they had worshipped since childhood. Others, appalled by the allegations, organized campaigns for justice and awareness. The world had polarized around Michael Jackson in a way that no other celebrity had experienced. By the mid-1990s, Neverland had become more fortress than fantasy. Surveillance cameras multiplied, gates were reinforced, and the press was barred entry. Yet even with walls and security, the perception of danger, real or imagined. Michael's childhood fascination with innocence had become an obsession born of paranoia. Friends watched as he meticulously recreated playgrounds, rides, and spaces for children within the grounds, desperate to preserve purity in a world he believed had corrupted him. And yet, every act of generosity, every attempt at kindness, every creation of wonder was scrutinized. Invitations for sleepovers were dissected in courtrooms and newsrooms, gifts examined as evidence of potential manipulation. Nothing Michael did was immune from the lens of suspicion. What was once whimsical and innocent became, for the public, evidence of darker impulses. As Part 2 closes, the reality is stark. The first lawsuit, the settlement, and the global media storm had left Michael Jackson, a man divided, beloved by millions, condemned by suspicion, and isolated within his own kingdom of fantasy. The world watched, judged, and whispered. The question remained, who was the real Michael Jackson, the entertainer, the friend of children, the man behind the sequencer, the scandal that followed him like a shadow he could never escape? By 2003, the shadow over Michael Jackson had darkened into a storm. The world seemed to wait for every misstep, every rumor, every fragment of his private life to become public fodder. The allegations that emerged then were different in scale, intensity, and consequence from anything before. A new lawsuit, this time criminal in nature, cast Michael into the harsh glare of an unforgiving media landscape. The headlines were brutal. King of Pop accused, Neverland, nightmare, innocence, or manipulation. News outlets dissected every word from lawyers, police, and alleged victims' families. Michael, once untouchable in his fame, now faced the prospect of criminal charges. Sleep became impossible. Every knock on the door made him jump. His friends described him as withdrawn, nervous, even fearful of the shadows at night. Investigators descended on Neverland with a meticulousness that mirrored military precision. Every room, every closet, every record of communication was cataloged, photographed, and examined. Michael's every interaction with children, formerly celebrated as acts of generosity, was scrutinized for possible impropriety. His collection of memorabilia, costumes, and childhood photos were sifted for hidden meanings or incriminating details. The walls of his sanctuary had become a cage, and he was both prisoner and king. The first police interviews were harrowing. Michael sat quietly, his calm demeanor masking the internal turmoil. Lawyers coached him on phrasing, tone, and expression, yet he struggled to maintain composure under relentless questioning. Each camera flash, each reporter's notebook, each whispered comment outside the room chipped away at the armor he had built over decades. The public reaction was instantaneous. Fans protested, defending his innocence, waving banners, chanting in streets worldwide. Critics demanded accountability, labeling the allegations proof of long-hidden patterns. The internet became a battlefield of opinion, rumor, and speculation. Michael's life, once about music, art, and performance, now revolved around defense, strategy, and survival. In the courtroom, the narrative unfolded with shocking intensity. Testimonies, confessions, and recollections created a chaotic mosaic that left even seasoned journalists stunned. Some accounts were disturbing, others inconsistent, and the world watched every revelation as though reality itself had fractured. The defense portrayed Michael as a man devoted to children, a misunderstood figure whose eccentricities had been misread, while prosecutors painted a darker portrait of a predator hiding behind fame and generosity. Behind the scenes, Michael struggled with exhaustion and paranoia. Neverland, once a haven of joy, now felt like a prison under constant surveillance. Security tightened further. Every visitor, every call, every email was filtered through multiple layers of scrutiny. Friends and family noted a profound change. Laughter disappeared. Trust vanished, and Michael became a figure of shadows and caution. Media coverage intensified the pressure. Sensationalist reporting blurred fact and speculation. And every performance, appearance, or public statement was dissected as potential evidence. Even casual gestures, handshakes, smiles, or playful interactions with children were analyzed for hidden meaning. Michael's reality had been rewritten by perception, and he struggled to separate truth from accusation. During this period, the King of Pop faced personal battles unseen by the public. Chronic insomnia, reliance on prescription medication, and anxiety attacks became regular companions. Friends tried to intervene, but boundaries were hard to maintain. Michael insisted on rehearsals, performances, and appearances despite his deteriorating health. Every show became a feat of endurance, a battle between his public persona and private despair. The trial itself was a spectacle unlike anything before. Cameras lined the halls, journalists crowded the streets, and the courtroom became a theater of emotion. Witnesses delivered accounts ranging from disturbing to contradictory, creating a sense of chaos that mirrored the turmoil in Michael's life. Lawyers argued fiercely, judges maintained strict order, yet the world outside debated every nuance. Ultimately, the trial revealed the fragility of celebrity in the modern age. Fame offered influence, power, and adoration, but it also amplified every accusation, magnified every misstep, and left no room for privacy. Michael Jackson, the man who had defined pop music, now fought not just for his freedom, but for his very identity in a world determined to define him through scandal. That is Part 3 closes. The stark reality is clear. The 2003 allegations and ensuing trial had transformed Michael Jackson's life irrevocably. Neverland, media scrutiny, and public perception had created a crucible of fear, isolation, and controversy. Whether innocent or guilty in the eyes of the world, Michael was no longer just an entertainer, he had become a symbol of fame's fragility, a cautionary tale of how public adoration and suspicion could coexist in terrifying proximity. The courtroom, once filled with tension, silence, and the hum of anticipation, finally approached its crescendo. After months of testimony, court examinations, and public scrutiny that had stretched across the globe, the moment of judgment had arrived. Outside, fans gathered in hopeful clusters, waving banners, chanting Michael's name, some with tears, others with silent anxiety. The world waited, collectively holding its breath. Inside the courtroom, Michael Jackson appeared smaller than the legend he had been. The King of Pop, who had once danced across stadiums in a flurry of sequins and light, now sat quietly, a figure marked by exhaustion, fear, and uncertainty. His lawyers, weary yet steadfast, whispered reassurances. Michael nodded occasionally, his gaze fixed on the judge, but his mind wandered back to Neverland, a place that had once been sanctuary, now forever linked to chaos and accusation. The jury filed in. Every eye in the room, every camera lens outside, captured the moment. The foreperson cleared their throat and began to read the verdict. Each word echoed like a drumbeat in the hushed room. "We, the jury, find the defendant." Michael's body tensed. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He closed his eyes for a split second, bracing for the impact. And then, relief. Not victory, not vindication, but a fragile, tentative exhale of freedom. He was acquitted of all charges. The room erupted in muted chaos, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions, and lawyers exchanging subtle glances of exhaustion and triumph. Outside, fans screamed, hugged strangers, and cried in the streets. Inside, Michael sat still, absorbing the enormity of survival. Yet freedom came with a cost. Months of mental anguish, insomnia, and medication had taken their toll. Michael's voice, once strong and magnetic, carried a frailty that mirrored his body. His movements were slower, more deliberate, less spontaneous. He no longer danced with the abandon that had defined his artistry. The King of Pop had become the cautious, haunted man who had endured public trial and media frenzy. The media narrative, however, refused to let him rest. Despite the acquittal, whispers, rumors, and speculation persisted. Headlines alternated between sympathy and suspicion, leaving a lingering stain on a career built on perfection and control. Michael faced the paradox of innocence in the eyes of the law, yet guilt in the court of public opinion. Each appearance, each interview, became a negotiation between reality and perception. In the aftermath, Michael retreated further from the public eye. Neverland, his once joyous kingdom, was sold, dismantled, and eventually abandoned. Fans mourned not only the trials but also the loss of the private world that had allowed him to be human, eccentric, and vulnerable. Michael moved between residences, rarely performing, and focusing instead on music behind closed doors. Yet, even in isolation, his legacy persisted. His albums continued to sell, his influence on pop music remained undisputed, and young artists cited him as inspiration. Yet, the image of Michael Jackson had been permanently altered. a man who had been adored worldwide, now a symbol of fame's perilous intersection with scrutiny, rumor, and scandal. In private moments, Michael reflected on the complexity of his life, the joy of creating music, the exhilaration of performing, and the innocence of childhood memories, mingled with fear, betrayal, and a sense of lost freedom. The world knew him as a star, a dancer, a singer, and a controversial figure. Few understood the human beneath the legend, the man who had longed for acceptance, affection, and peace. Years later, Michael Jackson's story continued to provoke debate. Scholars analyzed his trial, fans celebrated his music, and critics dissected his life choices. Yet, the emotional core remained clear. A person who had given so much to the world, endured intense public scrutiny, and survived extraordinary trials. Michael's life, filled with brilliance, darkness, and controversy, remained a testament to both the power and vulnerability of human fame. In the quiet moments before sunset, Michael could sometimes hear the echoes of applause in his mind, see the bright lights of the stage, feel the energy of millions of fans. But these memories were tempered by the knowledge that fame could both elevate and destroy. The man who danced on top of the world had survived its harshest trials, but he was forever changed. The world moved on. Media cycles shifted. Scandals came and went. Yet Michael's story endured. His music became timeless. His scandals became cautionary tales. His life, a complex mosaic of brilliance and controversy. He was remembered not only as a performer but as a figure whose existence illustrated the extremes of adoration and scrutiny, talent and tragedy, innocence and suspicion. In the final reflection, Michael Jackson's scandal was more than a trial. It was a mirror of society's obsession with celebrity, the hunger for spectacle, and the fragile line between human imperfection and public judgment. It was a story of survival against impossible odds, a journey through fame, accusation, and ultimately, resilience. Even as the world debated, the king of pop remained, a man who had danced, sung, and inspired millions, who had faced unimaginable accusations, and who had emerged from the crucible of controversy alive, if forever changed. His story, shocking and tragic, served as a lasting reminder that behind every headline, every rumor, and every scandal, there is a human being navigating a life far more complex than the world can ever fully understand. Even after the trial, Michael Jackson's life remained a roller coaster of public fascination and private turmoil. The acquittal did not erase the shadow of suspicion that lingered over him. Every appearance, every charity event, every whisper in the press was dissected. Fans who loved him fiercely and critics who scrutinized him relentlessly created a world where Michael could never truly escape the spotlight. Even if he tried. In the years that followed, Michael focused on his music more than the stage.